Okay, so let me tell you what just happened, because this is absolutely insane and will change everything you thought you knew about Donald Trump and the American justice system. We're talking about a historic moment that literally nobody saw coming this way. And man, the consequences are so devastating that Trump's lawyers are in total meltdown mode. What just unfolded isn't just another court decision. It's the end of an entire era of impunity that Trump built around himself for decades. We're talking about multiple legal fronts converging simultaneously in a way that has left even the most seasoned legal experts completely shocked by the speed and brutality of what's happening. Here's the unexpected twist. While everyone was focused on the federal criminal cases and the state trials in New York, a series of coordinated court decisions just created what experts are calling a legal perfect storm. We're not talking about one judge here and another there making isolated decisions. We're talking about a systematic pattern of courts in different jurisdictions reaching the same devastating conclusions about Donald Trump and his business and political operation. And the timing, man, the timing is absolutely brutal for Trump because it's happening exactly when he thought he'd found a way to escape all of this. But here's where it gets even wilder. Sources close to Trump's inner circle are reporting that the former president had what one person described as a complete meltdown when he learned of the decisions. We're talking screaming, objects being thrown, and an emergency session with his lawyers that lasted until the early hours of the morning. Because let me explain exactly what happened and why this is unlike anything we've seen before. It's not just about the criminal cases we already know about. It's about a cascade of financial, legal, and political consequences that are all materializing at once. Now let's talk about what really happened in the last few days because the details are absolutely devastating. First, we had the District of Columbia Court of Appeals decision confirming that Trump does not have presidential immunity for his crimes while in office. But wait, there's more. Simultaneously, Judge Arthur Engoron in New York finalized the damage calculations in the New York Attorney General civil fraud case, and the numbers are so astronomical that they literally jeopardize Trump's entire business empire. We're talking about over $450 million in fines and interest, an amount that, according to financial experts, Trump simply cannot pay without liquidating fundamental assets. And here's where the timing becomes absolutely catastrophic for Trump. While he's dealing with these devastating decisions, the Supreme Court has signaled that it won't intervene in federal criminal cases in the way Trump hoped. Sources familiar with internal Supreme Court discussions say that even conservative justices are reluctant to set precedents that could be seen as overprotecting former presidents. It's as if the entire judicial system has reached a point of saturation with the delaying and obstruction tactics Trump has been using for years. But let me explain why this convergence of events is so historically significant. Never in American history has a former president simultaneously faced federal criminal charges, state criminal charges, civil lawsuits with financial damages of this magnitude, and the real possibility of imprisonment before a presidential election. We are literally in uncharted territory, and the implications go far beyond Trump as an individual. We are talking about fundamental questions of accountability, the rule of law, and whether anyone, including former presidents, is truly above the law. Now here's what's really interesting about the reactions we're seeing. On the Republican side, there's a deafening silence from traditional party leaders. Senators and congressmen who used to vigorously defend Trump are avoiding comment or giving extremely cautious statements that practically say nothing. Sources on Capitol Hill report private conversations where senior Republicans are discussing scenarios where Trump simply can't continue as a candidate due to overwhelming legal pressure. And boy, is that a seismic shift in Republican political dynamics. On the other hand, Democrats are being surprisingly restrained in their public reactions, suggesting a strategic coordination to let the legal processes speak for themselves. But behind the scenes, according to sources close to the Democratic leadership, there is a sense that finally, at last, the system is working the way it should. Years of frustration with Trump's apparent ability to escape consequences are giving way to an optimistic caution that this time it might be different. And the reaction on social media has been absolutely explosive. Truth Social, Trump's own platform, is being flooded with posts from supporters ranging from outright denial to growing panic. We're seeing hashtags like #FakeWakeAmerica and Fake Corrupt System trending, but also a growing number of users questioning whether maybe, just maybe, Trump really did the things he's being accused of. It's a crack in his support base that may be small now, but which public opinion experts say could expand rapidly as more details emerge from the proceedings. Let me explain why this moment is so fraught with history and precedent. Since Watergate, we haven't seen a former president face the kind of legal scrutiny Trump is facing now. But even Nixon was never criminally prosecuted because Gerald Ford preemptively pardoned him. Trump doesn't have that protection. He's completely exposed, facing multiple jurisdictions that have no obligation or incentive to coordinate their actions to benefit him. It's as if decades of political norms and niceties have finally come to an end. The financial aspect alone is devastating enough to change everything. Wealth experts specializing in high net worth individuals say Trump may be forced to sell iconic properties like Trump Tower to cover fines and legal costs. And here's what's truly brutal about that. Selling properties in a financial emergency means accepting prices far below market value. We're potentially talking about the disintegration of the business empire Trump has spent his entire life building, and which is fundamental to his public identity. But wait, there's more. The international ramifications of this situation are only beginning to unfold. World leaders who maintained respectful relations with Trump during his presidency are now recalculating their positions. European diplomatic sources report that there are serious discussions about how to deal with the possibility that the Republican presidential candidate could face imprisonment during the election campaign. It's a foreign policy nightmare that no one in the international community was prepared to face. And here's what nobody's talking about, but which could be the most significant consequence of all. The impact on the 2024 elections goes far beyond Trump as a candidate. Republicans in races for the Senate, the House, and state governorships now have to navigate the question of how to position themselves in relation to a party leader who could literally be in jail before Election Day. It's a political calculation no Republican strategist ever imagined having to make. Sources close to the Trump campaign describe an operation in total survival mode. Strategy meetings that used to focus on political messaging and campaign organization are now dominated by discussions about legal issues and crisis management. Fundraisers report that major donors are hesitating or canceling financial commitments, not because they don't support Trump politically, but simply because they don't know if he will be viable as a candidate in the coming months. Now let me tell you about the psychological aspect of what's happening, because that's just as important as the legal and political aspects. Trump built his entire personal and political brand around the idea that he's a winner who never loses, someone who always finds a way to come out on top. This narrative of invincibility was fundamental to maintaining his support base and his influence in the Republican Party. But what's happening now fundamentally challenges that narrative in a way that may be irreversible. Psychologists who study authoritarian political leadership explain that figures like Trump rely on a perception of power and invincibility to maintain control over their actions. When that perception begins to crack, the effect can be a rapid cascade of loss of support. We are beginning to see signs of this with elected Republicans subtly distancing themselves from Trump, or at least being much more cautious in their statements of support. But here's where the situation gets even more complicated. Trump still maintains substantial support among the Republican base, and there is a real risk that the legal proceedings against him will be seen as political persecution, potentially strengthening his position among his most fervent supporters. Experts on political extremism warn that this type of situation can create a dangerous dynamic where Trump becomes a martyr in the eyes of his supporters, potentially leading to demonstrations or even political violence. The implications for American democracy are profound and complex. On the one hand, we have the demonstration that the legal system can function independently of political power, which is fundamental to the rule of law. On the other hand, we have the spectacle of one of the country's two main political parties potentially nominating someone who may be in prison. It's a situation no modern democracy has faced before, and there's no manual on how to navigate these waters. Constitutional experts are furiously debating issues they never thought they would have to seriously consider. Can an imprisoned president govern from jail? How would national security meetings function? What would happen to nuclear codes? These are no longer theoretical academic questions. They could become urgent practical issues depending on how the coming months unfold. And then we have the impact on American institutions more broadly. The Department of Justice, the FBI, the federal judicial system, all are being tested in unprecedented ways. Every decision, every action, every statement is being analyzed through political and legal lenses simultaneously. It's an institutional pressure that can strengthen these institutions by demonstrating their independence, or it can damage them if the public perception of politicization deepens. Now let's talk about what might happen next, because the next 6 months could be the most consequential in American politics since the Civil War. If Trump is convicted in any of the federal criminal cases before the Republican convention, the party will face an existential crisis. Delegates will have to decide whether to nominate someone who may not be able to serve as president even if elected. It's a situation that could permanently divide the Republican Party. But even if Trump manages to delay criminal trials until after the election through appeals and legal tactics, the civil lawsuits continue to move forward. Financial penalties are immediate and grow with interest every day. Trump may be forced into desperate financial decisions that undermine his ability to fund a competitive campaign. We're talking about the real possibility that the most powerful man in Republican politics could become effectively insolvent during a presidential campaign. And here's something that could be even more significant in the long run. Young voters, especially those who became politically aware during the Trump era, are watching in real time a demonstration that actions have consequences, even for the most powerful. This could shape an entire generation of Americans on issues of accountability, justice, and what it means to live in a country where no one is above the law. The global impact cannot be ignored either. America has spent decades promoting the rule of law and democracy around the world. Global authoritarians are watching to see if America can truly hold its own leaders accountable when they break the law. If the American system fails this test, it will have ramifications for efforts to promote democracy worldwide. If it succeeds, it could demonstrate a democratic resilience that inspires similar movements elsewhere. But let me be clear about one thing. No matter what your political perspective is, what is happening now will define how American history is written for decades to come. We are literally living through a historic inflection point where norms that have lasted for centuries are being tested to their limits. The decisions made in the coming weeks and months by judges, politicians, and even ordinary citizens will determine what kind of country America will be for our children and grandchildren. Sources close to the discussions in the Department of Justice report that there is a keen awareness that every move is being watched not only by Americans, but by the entire world. The pressure to get it right, to demonstrate that justice can function fairly and independently, is immense. But there is also a determination that this time, finally, no one can be above the law, no matter how powerful they have been or think they are. So, let me summarize what's really happening here, because it's bigger than Trump, bigger than any political party, bigger than any individual election. We're seeing the ultimate test of whether America is truly a constitutional democracy, or just an oligarchy in disguise where the powerful make their own rules. The coming months will answer that question in a way that cannot be undone or reinterpreted. The stakes couldn't be higher. If Trump manages to escape real accountability once again, it will set a precedent that American presidents are effectively immune to the laws that govern everyone else. If the system manages to hold him accountable, it could restore faith in American democratic institutions in a way that seemed impossible just a few years ago. And whatever the outcome, one thing is absolutely certain. The America that emerges on the other side of this crisis will be fundamentally different from the America that entered it. We are living history being made in real time, watching the foundations of American democracy being tested in ways the founders could never have imagined. And nobody, absolutely nobody, really knows how this will end.